Jake and Rebecca Haro are back in front of cameras today. They were arraigned on charges. They killed their 7-month-old son, Emmanuel, after prolonged abuse. I say back in front of the cameras because this was the first time the Haros were in front of the media per KABC.
Got him out of the car seat and I laid him down and so I could get his diapers ready. And somebody said, "Hola," and that's all I remember.
Whoever took our son, please give him back.
What they said today in court about being accused of their son's murder with his body still missing. We're on the case presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Prosecutors have said publicly they have a good idea of where Emmanuel Haro's body is, but at this point, we don't know where that location is, and his parents seem to be denying that they killed their son. Jake and Rebecca Haro were back in court today. Prosecutors believe they know exactly what happened to their young boy. This is video of the Haros in court today for their arraignment. They sat reportedly on different sides of the courtroom, didn't really look at each other, but they were arraigned together in the same hearing with separate attorneys. Their court appearance, though, it was brief. Again, they didn't even really look at each other. They didn't really say much, but they entered their pleas to these charges, and they both have pleaded not guilty. The Haros are facing charges of murder as well as a felony charge of filing a false report. Heading into today, they were being held on $1 million bond, and that is still what they're being held on right now. The Haros have pushed back on the allegations that they killed their son and that Emmanuel was the victim of prolonged abuse, which is what prosecutors have been saying. Both Jake and Rebecca Haro spoke from jail to Brian Rokos of Southern California News Group. He was in court today for this hearing this morning, and he will join me in just a moment to talk about that. Now, prosecutors believe that Emmanuel Haro died sometime between August 5th and August 14th. They say the 5th was the last time that they can confirm that Emmanuel Haro was seen alive. It was on the 14th, though, that the mom, Rebecca Haro, called 911 from the parking lot of a Southern California sporting goods store in a strip mall, claiming that she had been changing Emmanuel in her car when a man came up behind her and said, quote, "Hola," and then she says she was hit so hard she was knocked out. When she came to, Emmanuel was gone. Here's what she told multiple local television stations in the hours after she made that claim. This is per KABC.
Got him out of the car seat and I laid him down and so I could get his diapers ready. And somebody said, "Hola," and that's all I remember.
Law enforcement said they quickly found that story that Rebecca was telling to be inconsistent. Local news reporter even said he didn't see tears in her eyes when she gave that emotional plea on camera. When law enforcement challenged Rebecca a couple of days later about inconsistencies in her story, they say she stopped cooperating. Her husband, Jake Haro, also told a story that law enforcement say was a lie.
Whoever took our son, please give him back.
After roughly a week of investigating, law enforcement arrested the Haros at their home on August 22nd. Both were in their pajamas and boxers as they were brought to the police cruisers and put into custody. A couple days after the arrest, we saw Jake Haro out with investigators in a field on the side of a highway about 22 minutes from his home. Now, we don't know why Jake was out there with investigators. When asked about that and if he knew where Emmanuel's remains were, this is what the Riverside County, California District Attorney said.
Yes, we have a pretty strong indication of where the remains of baby Emmanuel are. That investigation is ongoing at this time.
The next time the Haros case is expected in court will be on September 16th. Before I get back to this episode of On the Case, which is one of the most watched shows on all of YouTube, I need to talk about our partner and sponsor, Morgan & Morgan. That is America's largest injury law firm. They have more than 1,000 attorneys and a history of winning, and they win a lot. They've recovered more than $25 billion from more than 500,000 clients. In just the past few months, a client in Florida received $12 million after the insurance company offered just $350,000. In Pennsylvania, a client was awarded $26 million. That is 40 times the insurer's $650,000 offer. And another client in Pennsylvania received $29 million after being offered only $500,000. Now, even if you don't think your case is worth millions of dollars, why not fight for what you deserve? Morgan & Morgan makes it so easy to start a claim. You can do it with just 8 clicks on your phone. So if you've been hurt and you need to start a claim, go to www.forthepeople.com/OTC. You can also scan this QR code on your screen or click the link below. Joining us now once again is Brian Rokos of Southern California News Group. You can read his work, including today's story on this case, at pressenterprise.com. Thanks for your time again, Brian. It's been great to talk to you in what has been a very, very sad case. As far as the arraignment today for Jake and Rebecca Haro, what stood out to you about what happened in the courtroom?
Well, it was just a pretty typical arraignment. These hearings last just a very few minutes. The attorneys for the Haros, they have their own sets of attorneys, entered not guilty pleas on their behalfs, and then they scheduled another hearing for September 16, and that's going to be kind of like a housekeeping hearing. Kind of what's notable about the attorneys themselves is your viewers might remember the case of David and Louise Turpin in Paris, California. They had 13 children, and they went to prison for abuse and neglect and torture and perjury. And David's attorney in that case from the Public Defender's Office, she's one of the attorneys for Jake. And the court-appointed attorney for Louise Turpin, he's been appointed the attorney for Rebecca Haro. So these are very, very experienced attorneys with very serious cases. They all have at least 20 years of experience, as does the prosecutor, who is a very high-ranking prosecutor in the Riverside County District Attorney's Office, and that's Assistant District Attorney Brandon Smith.
I know that they were both, so they were arrested at the same time. They're being held at separate facilities. They were at this same hearing at the same time, but they have different attorneys. How do you see the cases playing out if this was to go to trial?
Well, based on what Jake had told me in the jailhouse interview I did with him, he said that Rebecca is innocent, but he wouldn't talk about his own culpability, whether he had any, whether, I gave him an opportunity to say that, it was an accident, something like that, and he wouldn't go there. So my guess is that Jake would not turn against his wife. Whether Rebecca would turn against her husband, I don't know. Sometimes in these cases with multiple defendants, the attorneys work in concert with each other, but it could also go the other way. Right now, it's just so early in the case. It's difficult to know how that's going to play out. As we go along, there might be motions, there might be things that the attorneys say in court that might give us some insight into how they're going to play this.
I remember when we talked about your interview with Jake that he talked about, I think there was like some moment where he was trying to say something to Rebecca at some point. He's really stood by her, said that he loved her. When you looked at the body language today, because from some of the video that I've seen thus far, they both seem pretty stoic in court during this hearing today. What stood out to you about just how they interacted?
Well, they were sitting on opposite sides of the courtroom. I'm sure that the authorities wanted to prevent them from communicating. That might be why they're in separate jails. And both, by the way, are in protective custody. And pretty typical in court hearings, the defendants just sit there. They don't react. They certainly cannot signal each other because that's a misdemeanor. So they just sat there, but basically, and I mean, this was a very short hearing. I bet it lasted 3-4 minutes. Jake did sit there with his arms folded. The only time he spoke is he answered yes to one of the judge's questions, and Rebecca didn't say anything at all. Didn't see them really looking at each other. It would have been difficult to begin with because the attorneys were positioned in such a way that the defendants were blocked pretty much from the media's view. We could see Jake a little bit better. But nothing stood out as far as body language, facial expressions, anything like that.
When you interviewed Jake in jail, and we've seen him in that news clip after Emmanuel, and they claim that he had been kidnapped, and Jake was emotional, kind of looks in the camera and he's like, please someone bring my son home, something along those lines. And then we see him in court, he's very stoic. Like, how would you characterize just how he is to talk to, like the mannerisms, and who he is when you actually, and I think of not just you, but also detectives who have sat down with him trying to figure out what exactly happened to this boy?
He did seem a little overwhelmed by the circumstances when I talked to him. He didn't break down, but he was constantly wiping sweat from his face. He said he wanted to tell his side, but his lawyer advised him not to. But he wasn't defiant. He wasn't sad. He didn't act like he was worried or not worried, but just he seemed sweaty and overwhelmed. And he said, I said, what would you say to Emmanuel if you could? And he said, I love you, buddy.
What was that like for you when because you go into these interviews and I mean, you don't really know what to expect. And,
right.
And then after all of this, and this was also after we had seen him out in the field, on the side of the highway, and we don't know what he's told, detectives, and as far as prosecutors have said, like, he hasn't confessed or anything like that. But even in that moment where he says, I love you, buddy, what was going through your mind when you heard that?
That he was just thinking of something to say. I didn't seem calculated, but he probably, at that point in the interview, when he said that Rebecca is innocent and that he didn't want to talk about his role, I mean, it was kind of clear that something happened. And he didn't say that Emmanuel was kidnapped. And so at that point, I really wonder, I try not to make judgments about guilt or innocence, but when he's saying, I love you, buddy, it kind of rang a little hollow, just because what he had told me earlier, that it made it sound like something happened. Maybe it was something he said out of regret. Again, he and Rebecca are both presumed innocent, so who knows? This might take a turn we're not expecting. But as far as what it was like, I mean, when you're in a jail, those aren't friendly places. I spoke pretty much face to face with Rebecca with plexiglass in front of us. Jake was a little different. We were in different buildings, and it was a video hookup like we're doing here. But jails are cold and lonely places, and I don't like spending any time in them more than I need to, and I'm glad I get to leave, when I want. And you prepare for the interview. You have some questions that you think you'd like to ask. You're always mindful that you might have to pivot if it goes in a different direction. And so it's kind of intense a little bit, because you're constantly thinking, okay, he said this, now what should I say? And how much weight do I give to it? And where do I go from here? And you want to keep them talking so you don't go in guns a-blazing, saying, did you kill Emmanuel because you don't want him to shut you down. So it's just it's strange and intense, and you don't know what's going to happen, like you said, and you don't know. You know, I've been lied to. I've received confessions, so I just kind of write what I hear and let things play out and let people decide for themselves what they think of what the defendants say.
You know, when Jake Haro, you know, people started looking into his past once his name, you know, and he put the name in the news. You know, I mean, he was the one who was on TV himself looking into the camera and saying that. So, you know,
Exactly.
he, you know, clearly if they're guilty of what they're accused of, they definitely brought it upon themselves. But at the same time, they were the ones who went on TV. And then once people start diving into Jake Haro's past and they see the child cruelty conviction, but then they also see the sentence or lack thereof that he got. He was on probation. And Michael Hestron, the Riverside DA, his office prosecuting this case, like he did not hold back, feeling like it was a light sentence, that Jake Haro got off, got a big break. And since that news conference, just what is because I see the buzz on social media and I'm not there, but I mean, for you being in Riverside County and covering that area, I mean, what's the buzz been and the fallout about that previous case that Jake Haro was involved in?
Yeah, well, I'm planning to write a story about the judge's decision. I plan to reach out to various experts in the field, if you will, criminal defense, judging, that kind of thing, just to try to take their temperature of what's reasonable and what's not. And someone I spoke to, it was an off-the-record conversation just to take his temperature, but you know, he said that it might seem light, but then there might be some mitigating circumstances. Jake didn't have much of a criminal record. And, you know, there's pressure on judges to keep people out of prison in California. And maybe the judge said, well, here's a chance to give a guy a break. And, you know, maybe he seems sincere. And so we'll send him to a child batterers 52-week program. And, you know, hopefully that will help prevent him from reoffending again. But the Riverside County Sheriff, Chad Bianco, told me that he considers Jake to be what he called an experienced child abuser. So the sheriff said that Jake knows what to say, knows what questions are going to be asked, knows what's going to be said in court, and knows how to game the system, you know, to his advantage. One thing that's in our story today that's kind of interesting is when you go to like one of these DUI offenders programs or domestic violence offenders programs, they file with the court a report, like a report card at the end of the class. And these were 52 classes over a year, and the counselor, you check a box from 1 to 10. How likely is it that the person will reoffend? 10 being the highest and 1 being the lowest, 1 being the least likely. And that's what Jake Haro got, least likely to reoffend. And this is, again, the counseling he received after the 2023 conviction. And just real briefly, it says, Mr. Jake Haro continues to attend his assigned parenting class. He participated a great deal in the class. He showed a lot of insight into his behavior, and we think that he's benefited from these classes. So, you know, did he BS the counselors, or was this true that he, you know, really gained some insight? And again, you know, he hasn't been convicted of in the Emmanuel case, but you know, you read something like this and then you see the charges against him and you wonder, you know, did he BS these counselors? And I did reach out to the counseling program, and they haven't responded.
Because I also think too is, like, in some ways, and this was still alleged at the time, but he had a probation violation that he was still due in court for, I think it's September at the time that he was, when he was arrested for, like that case was already, like he had, not reoffend in terms of what he was guilty of, but he did violate or was accused of violating that probation, wasn't he?
Right, that's a felon or an addict in possession of a firearm. And so that case, and there's one other case that have been consolidated in the murder case. And so his attorneys in the Emmanuel case are representing him on those other cases. So yes, he's absolutely going to have to deal with that other charge, the firearm charge, the probation violation. But of course, those are small potatoes compared to what he's facing now.
Are you hearing anything more? Because the other part of the news conference that was just kind of this ominous way to answer a question is when the DA was asked if he knew where Emmanuel's remains were, and he said he has a pretty good idea, but wouldn't really go any deeper into that. It doesn't seem like that there's this, very public-looking search, as if, if they knew where he was and he was out in a field or they thought he was put somewhere, that you might expect to see if they knew where it was. Is there anything more we're learning about what the DA meant by that?
No, we're not. I did talk to the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, and I asked about active searches. And they said, we will search on foot when we get leads that prompt us to go in a certain direction. So they're definitely not out turning over rocks and things like that in random places. But what Mike Hestron meant by we know the general location, I don't really know, because if they had been, so they went out to this area, that brushy hillside area, and you would assume that when he's talking about we think we know where he is, he would be talking about that, because that is apparently where Jake Haro led them, or they had reason to believe that Emmanuel might be there. And what's odd is if they really thought he was there, how come we're not hearing about them digging up the whole hillside? I mean, that's just not happening. So it's a puzzle as to exactly what's going on with that aspect of the investigation.
Yeah, it just seems it was an interesting way to answer the question where they clearly believe that they have the evidence that shows this pattern of abuse they say happened that eventually ended Emmanuel's life, but then it's just kind of this where are the remains? And we'll see, as the more information comes out, if discovery, it gets to the point in a trial phase, we'll see how it all plays out. And final question, Brian, and this is kind of on the spot, but just I was thinking with like the Turpin case, and that was very high profile in Riverside County. I mean, that was a horrific case of neglect and abuse. And what do you remember about how that DA's office prosecuted that case, as far as what people could expect with how the Riverside County District Attorney could prosecute this one?
Well, they filed 88 charges against David and Louise Turpin, and eventually wound up essentially doing a plea deal with 14 counts. And as it was put to me, it was essentially one for each of the 13 children. It was a difficult prosecution for them because the victims were very cognitively impaired, and Mike Hestron said he was willing to put them on the stand if he had to, but I don't think he really wanted to, and so I'm sure that they were very interested in getting a plea deal done. I mean, no one said that to me, but given the circumstances and what they had to work with as far as witnesses, I think that was a pretty predictable outcome. The Emmanuel case, it's very different. I think a lot because of the pressure from the public, and Mike Hestron is a politician. He gets voted on every 4 or 6 years. He's already said there will be no plea deals. So and this is going to be different because we don't know who are the witnesses. What do they have? Who can they put on the stand? They are determined to go through with this. Hestron personally prosecuted successfully a bodiless case last year, but he had a lot of circumstantial evidence in that. He had incriminating text messages, he had surveillance images, and so far we don't know what they have. We had requested the affidavits written to get the arrest warrant and the search warrants, and those have been denied by the district attorney's office and the sheriff's department, citing the ongoing investigation. So they do have to lay out their cases in those documents, and so I'm sure they're going to hold on to that as long as they can. But obviously, they are required to turn everything over to the defense attorneys, just not the you and me public.
Because there's just so much in many stories these days, especially national stories, and when you have bloggers who are following it, these reports of what they found, what they didn't find through like anonymous sourcing, and they really haven't released much information other than kind of saying, the broad strokes of between August 5th and August 14th, and they believe it was long time abuse, and other than that, they've been pretty quiet for the most part. So it'll be interesting to see what's in those documents.
Right, and they're going to have to lay out their case to some extent when there's a preliminary hearing. That we don't know exactly when that'll be. They did set a date, but that's just Fantasyland stuff. It'll take a lot longer than that. But that's what we're looking forward to. If the documents don't come out, they're going to have to lay out a legitimate case. They're not going to be able to just say, Emmanuel disappeared. He was in the custody of the parents. The stories were inconsistent. I mean, I can't imagine that the judge would, hold them to trial for that. So they're going to have a lot more. And just one other little final note. Jeff Moore, Rebecca's attorney today in court, said that the crimes are alleged to have happened in Cabazon, where the parents live, and that there's a courthouse nearer to that in Banning, in more central Riverside County, and that would be about 45 minutes east of where we are in Riverside. And he thought it would be more appropriate to hold the trial there, or the case there, which is kind of an odd thing because Jeff Moore's office, the district attorney's office, and the public defender's office are all about one block from the Riverside Hall of Justice. So moving the case certainly would not be for the attorney's convenience, and my guess is that he would be hoping that the media hordes would not trek out to Banning for the case. That's a logical conclusion, but I can't say that with 100% certainty that that's Jeff Moore's motivation.
Yeah, very interesting if that's the strategy. We'll see how it all plays out. Brian Rokos with Southern California News Group. You can read his reporting right now on pressenterprise.com. Thank you as always for being with us on Law and Crime. It's great to speak with you.
Yep, my pleasure. Anytime. You guys do a great job.
That will do it for On the Case, presented by Law and Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.